Beautiful. Okay. Hello, everyone. Like I mentioned before, my name is Jorellis Canales. I am an advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. Aside from advising, one of the programs that I take lead on are the Career Insights series. And today we're going to be focusing on publishing. We have 4 really great alums that are joining us and affiliates of Barnard College. All of which who are working in the publishing industry in some capacity. So really excited to hear from you all as you share your advice, perspectives, as someone who's currently working within the field. So the hour goes really quickly, so we're just going to jump right into it. And I'm actually going to start off with Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, if you can give us a brief introduction about who you are, what you currently do, and how you got to the position you're in right now.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Lee. I'm an editor at Penguin Young Readers. So I edit books from 0 to 18, and Penguin is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And I graduated from Barnard in 2018, which seems like yesterday and also forever ago, crazy. And the way I actually started was through the Barnard Career Center. I joined the Barnard Career Mentorship Program when I was a sophomore, and I was paired with Laura Schreiber, who's currently an executive editor at Sterling Kids, but she was at Disney when we were working together, and I knew literally nothing about children's books or book. I knew that I liked to read, and that was the extent of my knowledge, and she really helped me with informational interviews and my applications and kind of walked me through the process. And then, I ended up getting an internship at HarperCollins and then Simon & Schuster and then Macmillan. And then I got a job at Macmillan as an editorial assistant. And then last year I moved to Penguin Young Readers to no longer be an assistant. So now I'm just editor, the title is. So really Barnard was very instrumental in helping me get to where I am, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without Barnard alums. So I'm really hopeful that I can continue giving back to future people who want to be in publishing.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And what did you study at Barnard?
Yeah, I studied English, and then I had a concentration in creative writing, and I minored in German.
Awesome. Oh, minor in German. That is so cool. Thank you.
Yeah, super random.
I love it. It diversifies your experiences is something that we talk about a lot at Beyond Barnard. I'm going to go just across my Zoom screen. So Johanna, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Johanna. I was Barnard class of 2019, studied English, also the concentration in creative writing, which I loved. I took German. I didn't minor in German, but I took German. I mean, I'm an editorial assistant, so thank you for even inviting me to this panel. Very much at the beginning of this whole journey, but so after I graduated from Barnard, I went to the Columbia Publishing course, which was super, super helpful. I definitely recommend it for anybody who's thinks that they might be interested in publishing because, I always loved reading, always loved fiction, always loved books, but I didn't really know much about the publishing world itself. And it's not really something you typically learn in undergrad at Barnard. So it was really, really helpful, sort of a crash course that I did over 6 weeks on the Columbia campus. And then right after that, I was desperate for a job and was super excited and was applying everywhere. And I heard about this job opening at Kirkus Reviews. And I had read Kirkus, and it had always been kind of a guiding light for me in terms of picking what I was going to read and recommending books for friends and family. So I applied. I didn't hear. I was like, it's okay. Keep applying. And then, some months later, they got back to me and they were like, the position is still opening, So I was there for 2 years. It was wonderful. Gave me an amazing overview of the whole publishing industry. The responsibilities also sort of shifted during COVID. So I took on a little bit of more of a journalistic capacity. And then after 2 years, I sort of started looking around and I heard about an opening at Doubleday and applied. And, I'm now super lucky. I started in November. I'm still very new, but really, really enjoying it. So yeah.
Thank you, Johanna, for sharing. Yeah, and I think this might ring true for some of the students that are joining us today, but taking those first steps, I find are always the hardest. And so I'm glad you're here to kind of share those experiences and those preliminary steps. So super helpful. Kate, share a little bit about your experiences.
So I feel like a little bit of an imposter because I didn't actually graduate from Barnard. But my thing was that I was a terrible student in high school. And so I started off at a school in Wisconsin called Beloit. And I actually was thinking about entering the publishing industry at that time, but it felt very remote to be in the Midwest. So I wanted to transfer back to the East Coast. So I started at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. And then I also was having some problems getting internships in New York City, like publishing related industry at that time. So I did an exchange program that I'm not entirely sure if it still exists, but it was called Spring in New York, and went to Barnard for 1 semester, and honestly, like, got all of the internships that eventually helped me get a job. But I will say that after doing all those internships, I worked for a photography book publisher called Umbridge Editions. I also worked at the cartoon department at the New Yorker, and at a nonprofit. And I went back to Mount Holyoke and actually still had a ton of problems getting a job just from applications. So I went to the Columbia Publishing course after that and got my current job at Sterling, what was then called Sterling Publishing, and as of January is now called Union Square and Company. It's a subsidiary of Barnes & Noble, and I've been working there for my entire career, actually. So it's been over 15 years, and I'm now an executive editor, and I manage our spirituality imprint, Ethos, which covers everything from, mindfulness and meditation to tarot, divination, mediumship, and all that fun stuff. So it's been quite the journey.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. And it's funny, if I may share, that during our exchange, Kate mentioned that they did not graduate from Barnard, but you are a friend of the college, and I think we mentioned that networking piece, right? Like, I think just the opportunities that you're able to access, even being here for a semester. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. And last but not least, Radhika, why don't you share a little bit about you, your experiences, and how's it been going so far in your career?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Radhika. I'm also a Barnard 2019 grad, so fairly, recent. I'm a literary agent at an agency called Jacaranda Literary Agency, and we're a very, very small team, sort of always been working from home, sort of doesn't, we don't have an office, so it's really fun and sort of strange, but also really cool because we get to work with a lot of really interesting writers and translators. So we sort of work with people all over the globe. I'm currently based in India, and we have the other agents in all different other countries as well. So we're really all over the map. And my experience has also been sort of, fairly traditional, majored in English and creative writing and history, like so many other people on this panel. And I got lucky and got the chance to intern while I was an international student at Barnard. I interned with Restless Books and the Feminist Press, and sort of, when I moved back home to India, right at the very beginning of the pandemic, I started working with the literary agency. So it's been a couple of years now.
Thank you so much for sharing. So I think as you all were kind of introducing yourselves and talking, a question kind of popped in my head. All of you having very pretty similar trajectories in the sense that you all studied, for the most part, English, and maybe studied something additionally on the side. I'm going off the script for a second, if you all don't mind. But would you say, and anybody can kind of put their input in, is that the only way to get into publishing? Is that a linear path that you all have to take? In your experience and based in working in the industry, what is your experience with that? Can students enter without studying English or having like a publishing course piece? What are your thoughts on that?
I could jump in. I would honestly say that your major at Barnard to enter the publishing industry does not matter whatsoever. at all. And I can see everyone agreeing with me. Phew. And I think that we've had like religion majors, sociology majors. I met someone who was a neuroscience major at college. It really doesn't matter. In fact, I think it's always exciting when you meet people who, as Aurelis was saying, like bring different experiences to the job that aren't necessarily like, oh yeah, you majored in English, cool, so did I. Not that it hurts to major in English, of course, but it doesn't. I really don't think it matters either way. So definitely pursue whatever passions you want to at Barnard and then kind of decide where you want to go from there. But I definitely think that in terms of the publishing course or internships, and I think, of course, those who took the publishing course can speak to this, but I did 4 internships at Barnard. And the reason that I did that was actually so that I wouldn't take the Columbia Publishing course because it is expensive, to be fair. And so that was kind of like point A, point B for me. And I do feel like one or the other, not that you need to do 4 internships, but one or the other can be really helpful and I think instrumental in getting a job in publishing.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm glad I saw some like sighs of relief. I think a message we're always trying to hammer home with students is that any kind of program or major that you pursue here, you know, Barnard being a liberal arts, having a liberal arts education can really, you can build foundational skills across industries, no matter what you go into. So even though it's a more traditional route, we always try to tell students, it's okay if you don't have X, Y, and Z, super linear path. There are ways to get into it. And one of those ways are networking. Everyone hates networking, but it can definitely serve you well in connecting. So thank you so much for that input. Anyone can jump in to answer this next question. What would you say are some of the key skills and competencies that are essential in your field?
I mean, I can jump in on this one, I guess. I mean, obviously, like language skills, editing, grammar, spelling, all that kind of stuff, very important. But for me, the thing that I think has kept me in the publishing industry is the ability to like originate books, and that means being bold enough to like reach out to authors and to come up with ideas based on, you know, sales data and trend information. Also just like a curiosity about the world around you. And granted, like I do, you know, general interest nonfiction. So I feel like you really have to be sensitive to the things that people are interested in, maybe in a different way than you would be if you're a fiction editor. But those things have been helpful to me, at least.
Anybody else? Any other skills, competencies? Okay, great. You all can always jump in and add additional things that pop up. So this one is a little bit more, you know, we're kind of shifting a little bit. I know as someone who studied social work and got my master's degree in higher education, student affairs, I know maybe this much about the publishing industry, right? So hearing from you all, what would you say are some of the challenges and opportunities that are created by diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how does that play out in your work?
I can start tackling this. So for me, coming from Barnard, I was really excited, particularly in children's publishing, that the industry was like 85% women. And I remember the first time I had an internship, I walked into the room and it was entirely women, and they were all making these really big decisions. And I was like, this is just like Barnard but amplified. I'm so excited to be here. And that's still very true. I will say that after, you know, a couple of years being in the industry, I realized that the people at the table were almost entirely white women, and that a lot of the assistants are of color. And I think that that is kind of a twofold, like interesting look into publishing, because I think that what publishing has been trying to do for many years now is diversify in so many ways, not just in BIPOC employees, but also, you know, just like every level of marginalization and representation. But what that ends up meaning is that, everyone kind of has to start from the bottom and work their way up. And that means that most of the assistants are of color and most of their bosses are white. And I think that definitely creates an interesting dichotomy between, like a dichotomy of power, I guess, between who's boss. But I do think it's changing, and I think it's getting better. And it's something that publishing is really trying to work on in terms of retaining those younger assistants and giving them the tools and the power to grow. I will say that right now in my job, I think because I'm mid-level, I guess, finally, I probably am like one of 5 Asian American mid-level people in children's publishing. We always laugh because there are like 5 of us and we all are friends. Every time we get like a Asian American submission, we kind of know that it's going to the rest of us. And so that's very funny. But I think that it's something that they're definitely working on, and especially because books are so identity driven, right? Like they're all about other people's identities, and because our roles are therefore really inherently tied to who we are as people, it's something that the industry has been forced not to shy away from, and that I really do think they're trying to work on every day, and I'm certainly hoping that I'm a part of that.
I mean, this is kind of specific, but I mostly do books that would have been called New Age a couple of decades ago, and it's very full of cultural appropriation, really bad. And also even the stuff that's coming out now is very skewed towards white privileged authors, and so I feel like there's a lot of need to bring in authors of color and different perspectives, and sometimes that can be interesting when everyone in the room is white. But I think it's important, and I really hope that, quite frankly, those assistants who are people of color will advance to mid-level and executive positions, so we don't have to just be a room of white women talking about why we should do this. But I think that there has at least been a lot of progress in the last 10 years, and it's been encouraging. The fact that I can go up and have a sales point and talk about why something is queer and that's a good thing is really great. We had a lot of success with something called the Modern Witch Tarot, and it's a tarot deck that's almost all feminine figures, and not everyone is white in the deck, and that was one of the reasons why it did so well. And so now I can bring in more stuff like that, and it's really encouraging.
Just to step in here, I really love what Elizabeth and Kate both said, and to sort of add to that, it's interesting because while I was in the States and working in the States, working in America, and American publishing is, I guess every sort of publishing industry in different countries has its own unique characteristics. And while I was in the States, I was interning, and I was always the sort of, non-white intern, where in a company or a press that was almost entirely white. And it was an interesting sort of reckoning for me personally to realize what my sort of position in the larger picture was when it comes to not just being a woman of color, a South Asian in publishing, in American publishing, but also being international, which was sort of my greatest difficulty while I was in the States, is that it's incredibly, I don't know if there's any students in the audience that relate to this, being international students or not, but I would say it's almost entirely impossible to be an international student and get a job in publishing in the US. But I'm hoping that, changes and it's easier for people from everywhere to work. And I think maybe the pandemic has helped us see that it is possible to do that in some ways. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think on Radhika's point, I think something that we do our best to be cognizant of is who is in our panels, right? Who is representing these particular industries. And I think for international students, there are definitely particular challenges and hurdles with securing internships. So I'm really glad that you were able to join us and kind of provide some insight on that in your own experiences for sure. This next question kind of relates to or touches upon some of the things that you all have already mentioned, but if there's anything additional you'd like to add to this, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how maybe your visible and invisible identities have played out in your career thus far. Totally okay. There's like nothing further to add. I just wanted to provide the space. Anything additional that you wanted to share for us?
I was thinking a lot about what Kate said about how publishing is definitely moving on the, because I feel like we talk about ourselves, but how it's moving in the book sides of things, which is like a huge part of our jobs, obviously. And I definitely think that children's publishing is almost like entirely focused on diverse books and marginalized stories. And I'm sure that's true of adult as well. And I think that as a result, it's been, it has been good in that, you know, like, because I'm an Asian American woman, and as I joked about like getting all the Asian American submissions, the fact that I'm getting so many and the fact that they're immediately thinking of me is a great opportunity. I think most of the time you have a book, you know, for example, by a Black author that goes to a white editor and a white marketing team and a white publicity team and a white production team. And so I think to have a team that has like, oh, we have an Asian editor and a Black marketer and a Black publicist, like that's a really exciting team to build. And so I think that that is something that I feel people have really appreciated in terms of like what I personally can offer to the table. And I think that it's always a tricky situation because you will have to like more overtly bring your identities and which identities you want to share into that conversation. Because, you know, publishing is not like law, for example, where you can be like, oh, I'm really removed from this contract and I'm just going to talk about, you know, some boring thing. Not law's not boring, but I personally don't love it. My sister's a lawyer, so she's always like talking about some boring thing that has nothing to do with like you at all, right? But publishing is always about you, if that makes sense. It's always going to be about like emotions and experiences that are closely tied to your own. And so I think that having a voice in that conversation and saying to sales like, hey, I think that XYZ thing is really important that we represent on the cover, or like having her face out because I want the audience to see that, you know, she's a Black woman is really important. And I think that those are conversations that I feel the team has been really receptive to more and more every day and every year.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Any other perspectives on that? Any other thoughts?
I know Elizabeth said, you know, that sort of take the conversation away from the you-ness of publishing and sort of, you know, talk about the books themselves. But this reminded me also is that I actually, it was at another sort of women in publishing panel at Barnard in my senior year that I actually met for the first time another sort of, you know, South Asian in the US person working in publishing. And it was just so great to see that and to be able to speak to somebody who may have had similar experiences to me and sort of feel that reassurance that it's possible for me to do that as well. And I think, you know, that's at the very like sort of most basic expression of representation, I guess, but it really did help. And of course, I'm very, you know, glad that Barnard was able to sort of facilitate that. And, you know, sort of, I guess this goes back to that conversation about networking as well and what that means and how that can actually help in an industry where networking is sort of like a necessary evil. It's of course so much tied to privilege and the connections you have, but you know, it definitely is something that helps open doors for you. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself. Absolutely. I'm actually so glad that you brought that up, because this brought another question that I had in mind for you all. And on that same vein of networking, if this applies to you and your experiences, how did networking play out in your career? Did you have to network to get to where you are, or shed a little bit of insight, if you have any, on how networking kind of played a role in you pursuing a career in publishing?
Sorry, I don't mean to take up too much space, but to jump in really quickly, I don't know if Elizabeth remembers this, but I actually had an informational interview with
I do remember
when
that.
I was
I was like, hey, oh my gosh.
yeah, so it's great to see you again, Elizabeth. But yeah, that was a big part of, I guess, being at Barnard, being a student, informational interviews, just sort of any excuse to find somebody to speak to about publishing and about their experience, and sort of just learn as much as you can from that. I had a lot of informational interviews, especially right after I graduated, because I was sort of waiting for my work visa to sort itself out. So I had, most of the summer right after I graduated to find an internship or a job. And I tried to find as many Barnard alums as I could, alumni as I could, to meet with and sort of just talk about their jobs and their careers. And that really helped, not just because, say, someone knew somebody or there was an opportunity they could help me with, or they could take a look at my resume or anything, but also just because it made me get used to talking about what I wanted to do. And it sort of helped me in interviews when I was actually looking for jobs.
I also don't want to take too much space, and I'm sorry, but I just wanted to say, yeah, I'm so excited that Radhika has a job in publishing and that our networking hopefully worked out. But yeah, similar to her, networking was like the number one thing that honestly got me a job in publishing. As I mentioned, I had Laura Schreiber, who I think works with Kate in some capacity. Yes. And she helped me get like 1 million informational interviews with Barnard alums. There are so many Barnard alums in publishing, because publishing tends to be a lot of people in like who went to liberal arts colleges and women's colleges. And when I went in for my first internship interview at Harper, unbeknownst to me, I had like 4 people who had sent the hiring manager, who were all from Barnard, who sent the hiring manager my resume. Some of them I had talked to, some of them I hadn't even talked to, and it was like a connection of a connection. And so obviously, even though I had to like show my skill set and have a conversation and like illustrate my passion for publishing, having those people to silently back me up was really important. And I think that it's actually really great, even when you're in the industry, to continue to network, because I feel like the community that you can find in publishing is really important. And also for future, like publishing is a job where you tend to move quite often. Sometimes people stay for like 30 years, but I feel like that's on the rarer side. So I do think that like sometimes you'll meet someone and then they'll be like, hey, I have a job opening. So, there's just, yes, networking is definitely a necessary evil, but I also think it can be really lovely and you can make a lot of friends through it too. For example, Laura and I are super close friends. I went to her wedding, so like it's not even it's not even that mentor-mentee relationship anymore.
First of all, Laura is really nice, and I have not known her for super long, but she's great. Second of all, it's funny because I took advantage of a lot of different alumni associations because I went to a lot of different schools, and Barnard was definitely the best. I got a lot of internships when I went to Barnard for 1 semester, and I've actually, I was able to stay in touch with some of the people that I met through the Alumni Association for a pretty long time. So that was really helpful. I got the New Yorker internship through Barnard, and that was actually what got me into the Columbia publishing course. And actually the guy who was working with me at the New Yorker was the one who wrote my recommendation for Sterling. So I really feel like Barnard played a huge role in getting my job. And now I really feel like most people who are in the industry also want to help people. Like, I love it when people ask me for informational interviews. If you guys want to know about New Age publishing, I got you. Because like, why would you be in this industry if you didn't want to help other people? It's so self-selecting. It really is. So, and hard to get into.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I feel like, yeah, like, I mean, I definitely in the informational interviews that I had, it was really helpful. And also, I think maybe even more so in just like job interviews, I was always surprised by the amount of like, you know, even the jobs that I totally didn't get, and you know, but those people would then go back and say, oh, I've heard about this opportunity, or they would email on my behalf for a hiring manager that was looking. I think it's really important to, you know, you can actually, you know, the information, I don't know, that for me, the informational interview thing is, it's tricky because it can feel quite transactional. And I think most important for me when I was doing that kind of thing was like, this is a person, like you should talk to them as you would talk to a person you're getting to know. And actually it could be a friend down the line. And for me, the first informational interview I had ended up being the person who I like love the most in this industry, who's really kept an eye out for me and, you know, alerted me to job openings, but also is just a friend. And I think that was, you know, that was really formative for me while I was looking around for jobs and casting about and despairing, thinking I was never going to get one. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's, you know, everybody's a potential friend who could, you know, be really lovely to have in your life down the road. So I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think so many amazing points that you all kind of touched on, and I think really hammering home. So the idea of it feeling a little bit more transactional, right? Like remembering that you're connecting to a human being and taking advantage of the resources that are at Barnard and kind of the low stakes, low level networking that are provided by like events like this, right? Like Career Insights. It might not feel like it right now, but it's an opportunity to start networking. And I think really not a personal win, I wasn't there, but a win is hearing about the connection between Elizabeth and Radhika. Like that is just really what we really try to encourage students to do. And it is a matter of having conversation and reaching out to not only Barnard graduates, but also people who are connected to Barnard, people such like Kate, you know, who were here for a bit, but also, you know, were able to benefit, but also become part of Barnard's culture and just be a part of the community. So I think definitely, thank you so much for all of you for sharing on that. We're roughly around, you know, the half hour mark. So I want to encourage students to start thinking about any questions that you have for our panelists. I am going to answer or ask our panelists one more question. So if there's anything on your mind, we'll spend the last couple of minutes of our panel together answering any questions that are coming to your mind. So feel free to fill the chat or you can unmute yourself when that time comes. Just get your gears turning. So last question that I have for our panelists, what advice would you give to a Barnard student who wants to enter your field?
Okay, I'll go first. It's the beginning is the hardest part. For me, being an editorial assistant, getting in was incredibly hard. It took a lot of time and money, quite frankly. But after the first few years, it got a lot better. And I really am encouraged by people who are trying to make things better for editorial assistants now, honestly. And I'm trying to support them like as somebody who's later on in her career. So I guess my advice would be just keep at it, be creative, be professionally annoying if you're trying to get an internship or a first job. And once you get a foot in, then things will get easier.
One of the best points of advice that an internship boss actually gave me was that no one will ever like do anything for you without asking. And so I think a big thing is just really being proactive. And that means when you get your first internship, making sure that you kind of create a set of goals for yourself and then share them with your boss. Like you don't, they may have things that they want you to do, but the more clear and intentional you can be about what you want, the easier it will be for you. And frankly, that's how I got to where I am today. I ended up skipping a level. So I was an assistant editor at Macmillan and then I skipped associate. And I applied for this job, and I was like, okay, well, there's no way I'm going to become an editor because I haven't even been an associate editor yet. But I was like thinking about what my intern boss had said so many years ago about like, no one will do anything for you. You have to like just take it by the reins. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to apply. And it worked out. So, you really have to kind of believe in yourself, or at least fake believing in yourself until that opportunity appears.
And I think along similar lines, knowing when you want to move on, like when it's time to kind of move along, and when you've assimilated as much information as you're going to get from an opportunity, it's hard and it's kind of scary. And publishing is like so tricky to get into that it can feel like, oh my God, I don't know that I want to like shift and lose my footing and not have something, not have like a safety net. But I do think part of believing in yourself, part of believing in your value as, as an employee, but also just, as somebody interested and passionate about this industry is, you gotta kind of know when to say when, when to get out and move on.
Also, like on that note, and also sort of related to what we've been speaking about, is if these are your first few internships, the first time you're really, sort of exploring what you're interested in within publishing, I guess it's like don't say no to opportunities because you think that's not what you want to do. That's not what your long-term goal is. From what, from all my many informational interviews and also sort of where I am myself right now, very early on in my career, is like understanding and realizing that everyone has very, very different paths into publishing, into the book world. They don't all look the same, and that's okay too. I feel like publishing is in many ways a very traditional space, and it, especially when you have a lot of higher up editors and VPs and sort of sort of the higher executives, they've had very similar paths sometimes, but I think it's reassuring to see that you can sort of find your way. Like Kate said, once you get a foot in, it doesn't necessarily need to be exactly what you're interested in or what you for example, when I sort of first started trying to get internships or jobs, I knew, like, I guess a lot of people do that. Oh, I definitely want to do editorial. That's what I'm meant to be an editor. And I sort of, that's not what I'm doing at the moment, but I love it regardless. It's still, being an agent gives me sort of, space to do many different things, and editing is one of them. And I enjoy that regardless. And, who knows if later on I still decide that no, indeed, being an editor is what I want to be. But I think sort of the long story short is that don't put yourself in a box. People are going to do that for you anyway. So, sort of.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And especially on that last piece about, I feel like this happens with professionals who, just entering, like freshly graduated out of school, right? And you want to find like the perfect job, right? And I think that's a little bit of pressure that sometimes we can feel, and it can be hard finding positions that are like your dream job. And not to say that that's not out there, but a lot of times it's stepping stones, right? I like to remind students that there are people far in their careers that decide like, hey, like I'm gonna actually switch this, right? Or I'm gonna take the next step and go in a different direction. So this is kind of like a lifelong journey, not to sound like a LinkedIn influencer, but it really is like little mini baby steps that you're taking. So So thank you all so much for sharing. We're going to head to the Q&A portion of our panel. Alexa here put a question in the chat, so thank you so much for starting us off, Alexa. So for our panelists, Alexa was wondering if you had any advice about choosing a specialty or genre within publishing. What's some insight you can share on that?
I mean, basically what Radhika said, like, don't say no to things, because you don't even know if you're going to enjoy your job, even if you don't love the genre, because guess what? I hate new age stuff, or at least I did when I started, but it made it easier to be curious about what other people might like. I think it's actually been a huge boon for me to like not be in something that I feel like very personally attached to, because initially I wanted to work with illustrators, and I wanted to work with comic artists, and I wanted to work in the comic industry actually. But I just feel so strongly about that kind of stuff that sometimes I think it might have been hard to separate business and personal decisions. And like, I have no problem when it comes to astrology books. I'm great at it because I don't really like have a lot of personal attachment to it. So I would just say, be curious, you know, find a job that you like, even if it's not in a genre you like, and go from there.
Any other thoughts on Alexa's question before we move on to our next one? Awesome. Okay, so Jules put a question in the chat. Thank you for sharing, Jules. So this is for Elizabeth. What specifically do you love about children's publishing?
Yeah, so I definitely was someone who was like, this is the only thing I want. I'm only gonna do this. And I'm sorry that Kate just said that, and then I was very bullheaded about it. And I think the reason that I wanted to go into children's publishing is because I felt like when I was reading the classics in college, I liked them, but like I mostly gravitated towards like teen novels in my free time. And I think what I love about children's now is that I feel like the books that we are putting out directly impact people's lives and directly impact children's lives specifically. And I think, you know, of course, as an adult reader, you read adult books, but like as a child reader, you're forced to read all the time. And so those books that you have to read for school, or you choose to read for like summer reading, for example, are very like developmentally influencing, especially as your brain grows as a child. Like those books are growing with you, you know? And I think that that was something that was really exciting to me. And I also just really love how fun children's publishing is. I feel like we are a very diverse, like in terms of personality and like quirky group. When we were in the office, I remember, for example, I used to like come in overalls, and then another one of my coworkers was like, oh my God, I love your overalls. And then she got overalls, the same ones, and then we wore them matching. Like, I don't know, it's just like ridiculous. Little things like that I found really enjoyable and fun. And yeah, and I think that also sometimes it's like nice to not, you know, as what Kate said, like it's nice to not read what you read in your free time. So for example, now for pleasure, I don't read children's books. I only read like adult fiction or adult nonfiction. And so to have kind of like my job and my reading pleasure separate is a little bit nice.
Thank you. Waiting for a little bit more questions, but if anybody wants to come off mute and ask their question, that'd be great. Oh, we got another question from Lucy. Thanks for sharing, Lucy. Okay, so for those of you who studied creative writing, feel free to share your questions. Yeah, I like this. Are you still writing? How challenging is it to make space for that with your career? And if not, where in your job do you feel like you're able to channel that creative side of you? So excellent question. Any thoughts on this?
I'd love to answer that if I can. So I majored in English writing, English and creative writing, and my sort of thing was poetry. And my senior sort of creative writing project was also poetry. And I am still writing. And it has been a bit difficult, just because I feel like with something like poetry, maybe a lot of other creative writing is like this as well, is that being around other people who are also writing really helps, and sort of workshopping and things like that. And not having that space, definitely, at least personally for me, was difficult. But I have been writing, and you know, I'm happy to say that, you know, I'm working on my first poetry manuscript. So it kind of feels like I'm workshopping again. So yeah.
I can also answer this. Oh, sorry, Eurellis.
Go right ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just gonna say, so I'm a full-time author, in addition to being a full-time editor, which is new to me. My first book came out in 2021. I'm sorry, it's been like, who knows even what time is. And I'm currently revising my second. So I write YA and middle grade, in addition to editing YA and middle grade. And that opportunity actually came about because I was working on my creative writing thesis at Barnard, as a senior, and I was complaining about it. And then I was also talking about like figure skating because it was the Olympics and I liked figure skating. And an editor asked me if I'd be interested in writing a figure skating middle grade. And I remember that I was like, literally, what the heck? Like, I was like, all I need is a job. I don't know what's happening. Please, like, I can't. But then I ended up working at Macmillan, which is where the editor worked. And he kind of gave me like a year, honestly, to just think about it. And I ended up writing it, and it came out in 2021. And then I decided to get an agent and write more. And to be honest, like, it's definitely tricky, because you edit all day and then you go back to your desk and you're like, wait, now I have to like work on more words. So I think it's something I'm definitely adjusting to. But it is really, I'm very, very privileged that I'm able to use my creative writing concentration, in a way that is very like point A, point B, and edit at the same time. And I think it also has brought me closer to my authors, because I really understand the author experience and the kind of anxieties that come with that very well. And I also feel like it's just great insight into what other publishers are doing, because now I work at Penguin and my books are published with Macmillan and HarperCollins respectively. So I'm always like, oh, those are your royalty rates. Like, I know which house this is. So that's very fun. But yes, if anyone is ever interested in talking about that, because I do feel like it's becoming more and more common that editors, designers, people in publishing publish their own books as well, I'm happy to chat.
Thank you so much for sharing. Lots of questions in the chat. This is awesome. So question from Natalie, which is not a basic question at all. This is a great question. But what does a general like day in the life look like for you within your career? And do you find that a lot of your days are more collaborative or more independent work that you'll be doing?
I'll get you guys started. So, I mean, I would say that I start working, so I'm in the office 2 days a week, and the rest of it is remote. You'll probably hear this a lot about publishing, but editing happens at all times and usually outside of regular hours, unfortunately. So I would say I'm answering emails and in meetings between the hours of like 9 and 6. And then after that, I'm doing editing and stuff like that. And sometimes I manage to squeeze some in, but more collaborative or independent. I would say for me, it's probably like 60-40 independent collaborative. I have a lot of meetings, but not as many as some other people. So.
Any other additional thoughts? Anything to add to Kate's response?
I'll add, just, I think being an assistant and kind of coming to the entry level in publishing, what's been really, really lovely for me is I work for 2 editors, and this also kind of speaks to the genre question of like, I think a lot of the time when you're applying for adult trade jobs, it's going to usually be fiction and nonfiction, or some kind of mix. And what's really lovely is that the collaborative part comes in when I'm reading submissions and they want to hear my opinion. So if something comes in from a high profile agent or an author that they've worked with before, but they're not sure if they want to do another project, or a debut author who they've heard great things about, but has never been published before. That's where, I guess it's both independent and collaborative, where I'm reading, I write a report, and then we can speak either on the phone or over email, and that kind of helps them parse out if they want to go further down the road or not. And also interesting moments happen when you disagree, and you can kind of have an interesting conversation about the merits and what you're seeing in it that they're not, or what they're seeing in it that you're not. But that's like one of my favorite parts, is being able to talk to them. I think I've also got really lucky because I get they're wonderful people, but yeah, it's been really fun.
Thank you so much for that. Aaliyah, we're gonna hit your question first, then we'll circle back to Alexa. So Aaliyah put in the chat, would you all say that certain personalities or skills make someone more or less suited to publishing, and to specific genres in publishing? So kind of a thinking one, yeah. Anyone have a response to this?
I would say that certain personalities, not at all. I mean, there are so many different personalities in any industry, and that's true of publishing for sure. I don't think you have to be like particularly extroverted or particularly introverted to be in public. It doesn't matter. Just be yourself. In terms of skills, I really do think that, I think as Kate had said earlier, a critical eye that's able to be constructive is really important. And that was a skill that I really learned at Barnard as a writing fellow. And I think being a writing fellow was really helpful because in that course and in that experience, you're forced to like figure out how to meet with a student, and then you can't just be like, well, this whole paragraph sucks, so like move on. Like, that's not the job at all. It's really to be like, hey, so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on XYZ specific idea, and how can we make sure that we amplify those thoughts in the actual essay? And that literally directly translates to publishing. And so I think that if any of you are writing fellows or speaking fellows or interested in that, I feel like that's such a great foundation for publishing, and it's really important to kind of gain that experience so that you can be a better editor if that's the field that you choose to go into. I do feel like we're all editors and agents, but there's also like marketing, publicity, production, design. There's so many different fields within publishing that people don't normally hear about, and I'm sure I know that there are different skill sets for each of those as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have 2 more questions. I'm hoping we can get to them with 5 minutes left. Circling back to Alexa's question. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious if anyone else has something to elaborate on. But Alexa was wondering how important enthusiasm is compared to experience in the field. So Alexa, you can correct me here. I'm assuming when you mean in the hiring process, when you're putting out applications, how you can kind of showcase your enthusiasm in a way that like, hey, I might not have this particular experience, but how can I get into the field with that? That's how I'm reading your question. Feel free to correct me. Our panelists, do you all have any thoughts on that?
I guess.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead, Kate.
Just really briefly, for the past couple of years, I've been interviewing our interns, and I would say that the thing that always gets me is if they are very familiar with our list and knowledgeable about the kinds of books that we do. I feel like beyond being like enthusiastic, that's really what helps and makes the difference for me, at least.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I totally agree with that. I would also say that maybe just very technically, this is like I hated writing cover letters, but it was, one of the only ways I could actually speak directly to the person reading my application for a job or an internship, and that's where sort of the enthusiasm aspect of it comes in. And I do also think that from at least my experience, that like actual work experience has always been given a lot of weight when you're applying for internships and jobs. And I also want to say that my first internship was unpaid, unfortunately, and I know that's the reality for a lot of people, and especially in publishing. And I hope that changes and no one has to ever do an unpaid internship again. But while that is a reality, if that's obviously not possible for everybody, but even if it means if you could do freelance sort of proofreading, or like Elizabeth said, sort of on-campus work that sort of directly translates or shows those skills, like being a writing or a speaking fellow, things like that will always help.
Thank you. And on to our last question that we have with 4 minutes left. This question is from Jules. So this is regarding the remote work, hybrid work, if you have it. Just for panelists, you can share a little bit of perspective of what that's like for you. Do you have the ability to work from home? Are you in the office 5 days a week? Talk a little bit about that experience and how that's been like for you.
So we're doing both. I think it's sort of as you want, as you feel comfortable with, I would say. But I think that's been really helpful because I've spoken to other assistants. I started in the pandemic, but I've spoken to the second most recent addition to the team, and she started and had basically a full year in which nobody went in. She was not seeing anybody. She was really not meeting anybody in person, and that was really hard, as you can imagine. And so she was just sort of like Zooming and having as many kind of Zoom coffee dates as she could with people on our team. And I was lucky enough to be able to join at a time when people are coming in like 2 or 3 days a week. I can get lunch with people. I can get lunch with the other assistants, the other editors, and also connect with like people on the publicity team. And as Elizabeth said, like, the people who are actually on a completely different side of the industry, but are like making the books happen in a very, very real way. And I feel very lucky to have, a workplace that is really, it really does kind of encourage both. It's kind of really what you're comfortable with. So it's been great.
Yeah, same. It's what you're comfortable with for me as well. I haven't unfortunately been going in recently, just because I'm not personally comfortable taking the subway because of like the Asian American hate crimes. But I was before, and it was really nice to come in. Like, I think I came in once or twice a week, but like no one really cared what day. I just showed up whenever. And so I think that flexibility has been really nice. Penguin Random House put out a statement saying that they will never ask employees to come back and work full time if in the office if they don't want to. And then I think there was just like a New York Times article about that as well. So I know that's not true of every publishing house, but there's definitely flexibility, and I'm really glad actually that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that people who want to work from home can.
Yeah, I am with the last minute or so. I really want to thank you for sharing that, because I think with we didn't get to talk about this piece during this panel, but before we talked about the realities of working from home and kind of that is kind of a silver lining with what horrible last 2 years have been, and what the realities of working in the city and commuting is very difficult nowadays, not only financially, but like Elizabeth mentioned, just like the incidences and just all the awful things that have been happening. Being able to work from home is definitely a privilege, which honestly should probably be a right for a lot of people. But depending on the industry, there seems to be a little bit of leeway there, and that you're able to choose, at least for some companies. So Thank you so much for sharing that. We are at 2 o'clock exactly. I really want to thank all our panelists for coming here today and sharing all of your experiences and your little pieces of wisdom for us. I am going to reach out to all of you and the panelists and to our students who have joined us today. Of course, you can reach out to me if you have any additional questions regarding the panel, but thank you so much for coming. It's been a joy to hear from you all, and I hope you all enjoy the sunshine today, if it's shining where you are, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I will talk to you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Alice. Bye.
Thank you, Alice.
Bye. So nice to
Have a
meet
good one.
you.